Welcome back. My name is Matt Reiners, and I'm the co-founder of Eversound, a company dedicated to improving quality of life for older adults by giving them the gift of hearing. Today, I'm joined by Mark McIntyre, the Chief Experience Officer of Fully Managed, formerly known as CareWorks, a national provider of managed IT services with a specialty in senior care, helping their partners through digital transformation. I was connected to Mark through a mutual friend and a fellow Matt Mello. So thanks for joining me today, Mark.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. So one of the things that I think keeps up a lot of people at night, myself included, this idea of cybersecurity. Why are we always talking about this?
It's interesting that we talk about always talking about it, but it's like one of those things where people still feel about like they know there's something going on in cybersecurity and they probably should pay more attention to it than they are. But it becomes a little bit almost desensitized to it over time because it's always there and prevalent and something that's kind of undermining some discussion, or it might not be in your top 5 things that you should do, but it's maybe number 6 or 7 always kind of sitting there. So we're talking about it because it's not going away. The reality is that in the first quarter of 2021, there was 3 times more ransomware and cybersecurity attacks than there was in all of 2019. So wow. It's not like disappearing from our world. The amount of attacks is increasing, the exposure that's out there is increasing, and we really kind of have to make sure we're keeping it top of mind in our discussions to make sure we're keeping ourselves safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last company I helped start, we were hacked one time by ISIS. I mean, they set up a landing page from our domain that was going to their page. We're able to it was just a WordPress update, but it was just still kind of like scary that people can actually do that. And you had mentioned like the numbers comparing, most recently like 2019, did the pandemic bring all this to the forefront even more?
It did in a number of ways. So, obviously the pandemic kind of created an unprecedented environment for healthcare and senior care. But it also put us in a position where a lot of our organizations providers were adopting new technology at a pace we've never seen before. Think about trying to have conversations between residents and family members, and they were happening over Zoom like we are having our conversation now. That hadn't happened on a regular basis. So there was a large influx of technology and an increased kind of adoption of technology kind of early on, and it continues to happen as a result of the pandemic. So when you bring more technology into the space, and especially when you do it quickly, you're actually kind of increasing your exposure. We had clients that we were trying to work with where they weren't trying to get their residents engaged with their family members, and devices were being donated from all over the place, and not necessarily being locked down or secured or anything along those lines. So, there's a little bit of cleanup happening right now as a result of the influx that happened kind of early on and during the pandemic. So there's definitely an overall impact on what the security risk and footprint looks like as a result of that adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the personal side of things, I'm always concerned of like someone like stealing my identity or credit card information and some of that stuff. But why do healthcare organizations have to be even more concerned about cybersecurity?
So you kind of nailed it right there. What you're concerned about people stealing is the exact reason why people focus on healthcare, because there's enough information within our patient health records to give people the information they need to kind of work through that identity theft. So it's not that I'm really interested in an organization and what the data they might have. I'm actually interested in the resident data that sits within that organization. So it's part of the reason why they're at risk and there's an increased exposure there. 34% of we had a partner of ours that went through a survey of their customers and did a specific kind of look at healthcare, not necessarily senior care specifically, but healthcare. And 34% of the participants that were surveyed had been attacked by ransomware in the previous 12 months. And of that, 65% had their data encrypted. So they had their data locked down and lost. And they did a survey on what the cost of recovery of that is. On an average, it was $1.2 million. So if you think about some of the organizations that we have and some of the folks that we know, that's a pretty significant spend. And it's not like what we had to write the check for as far as did we write a check for ransomware. It's the cost of the equipment that we had to replace. It's a cost of the people time that was out there. There's a overall cost of what that impact looks like. But that's not taking into account the risk of the resident, whether that's a health risk because there was actually downtime in the facility and we couldn't deliver care the way that we normally do. We had to go away from using some of the solutions we use, and now we had to use paper documentation. Whether that was just monitoring of the residents in some of the organizations that we work with, and the fact that they couldn't kind of continue to provide the same level of monitoring. And then there's also, I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of stress put on staff in senior care facilities, and then going through something, like a pandemic, and then throw on top, not using the tools and accessing the tools and the increased stress that you might have there. So, it's the exposure kind of specific to the healthcare industry is significant, and the data that we have in our networks and within healthcare and senior care as well is significant. And it's actually what the bad guys are looking for, right? It's the data that they want to find, and it might not have anything specific to do with healthcare. It has specifically to do with you and your information that they're trying to get.
Wow. So you're scaring me a little bit, but it's good to have these conversations, right? And really to think about like what we have to do and what we need to do, and what can senior care organizations do, and what do they absolutely need to do?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you said I'm scaring you a little bit, and the reality is, we don't want to perpetuate fear, but we want to create education. Right. The reality is, and like we talked about initially, it's not going away. Exposure's increasing. We're all using more and more technology these days. And so it's not about kind of an establishment of fear. It's like, the reality is there's some basic information and basic measures we can take that provide a high level of stability in the environment. There's a couple things I would say. Multi-factor authentication. I mean, we all know what that is a little bit now. We probably experience it in our day-to-day personal lives, where I'm trying to log into my Google account and they send me an authorization code that they text it to me. Multi-factor authentication feels like a workflow issue when I'm trying to log in a device. I don't have another device. How do I handle that within a senior care facility? But the reality is it's a great first line of defense. So, the amount of times that we've had customers that we've helped them kind of block some of those high level issues they might experience just from that second level of authentication. A lot of times CFOs are targeted with stuff. And we know of CFOs where they weren't the ones that wanted to adopt the technology, but the reality is they're the ones that are the target a lot of these phishing attacks and ransomware notices and stuff like that. And so, basic level multi-factor authentication, again, not expensive to deploy and relatively simple to set up. Another one would be just a strategy around keeping your equipment up to date and under warranty. We have a lot of customers and people we've worked with in the past where we're walking into their facilities and we're realizing they're still running, Windows 7 devices, and they're still running a lot of on-prem servers that are there, or they were donated some devices. Great that they had, they were donated, and good for the organization to kind of accept that donation, but it's a home-based version of an operating system that we can't secure. And, the reality is that all creates exposure. So just some principles around what devices are we going to bring into our community? What standard do we want to have for them? Is it under warranty, and can we secure it? It's not a strategy. We all spend money on devices. It's just a matter of spending it the right way. Oftentimes, and when we talk about kind of cybersecurity, everybody gets into backup and disaster recovery and stuff like that. That's not as complex of a strategy as you'd think it was. And there's a lot of solutions out there today that would kind of help, mitigate, and help recover if there was ever an exposure that happened. So, I would say multi-factor authentication, keeping your equipment up to date, making sure you have some type of backup that's in place that's monitored, single sign-on solutions if you can do it, so that you're kind of managing your identity across all of your software applications. And then the final one would be make sure that you have cybersecurity insurance in place, and that you understand what that security is, or insurance.
So let's talk about cyber insurance for a minute. Why is that becoming more challenging?
Yeah, for a number of reasons. I mean, the reality is, as insurance is insurance, and as the number of attacks go up, as they end up, paying for some of the ransomware that's out there, their costs are going up. And so we're seeing that the insurance companies are bringing that cost to our customers. And so we've seen customers that are saying their cybersecurity insurance has gone up by 3 times or more. Wow. Significant numbers to the bottom line. In some cases, we're seeing potential customers that are being denied their cybersecurity insurance, and they're coming to us and saying, I was denied my insurance, and I know I need to do some basic things like those things I mentioned earlier to kind of get to a point where I can meet and now apply for my cybersecurity insurance again. So having that insurance in place and understanding what that policy is, we have talked to some prospects that don't understand what they signed up for with their insurance. So the insurance providers are providing a minimum criteria that you need to be following in order for your insurance to kick in. And a lot of senior care facilities aren't even meeting that minimum criteria. So the requirements to meet and kind of get cybersecurity are increasing. But at the same time, the premiums and rates are going up. And so, it's a difficult situation. The reality is that with, again, some of that basic security measures in place, you can meet your security requirements. And in some cases, we're seeing brokers actually reduce premiums when they've met some basic requirements.
Wow. Yeah, I know for ourselves that when we've worked with providers, they've even had us fill out questionnaires around our technology to see, what issues or potentially some could have, and requesting even more cybersecurity insurance from us to partner with each other.
Yeah, it's called the supply chain, right? And it's happening, in the physical supply chains, but it also happens in service-based businesses where, if you were exposed or attacked and something happened, and then that actually got them onto your network, what does that mean? So definitely you may have a requirement to acknowledge and provide certification on your cybersecurity insurance, but because people need to understand kind of the larger ecosystem that we all work in, when we're in a digital age. And so we're all kind of exposed a little bit on who we're connected to.
Absolutely. And so, Mark, what advice would you give to senior care organizations right now about cybersecurity?
Number one is, and I was trying to think about earlier about kind of the right analogy to this. It's like when you need to clean out your garage, or you have something you're doing that you just keep putting off. It's the task that you don't like doing in your at-home to-do list or whatever it might be. Having a proper basic cybersecurity plan, right? Understanding what your risk is, what your footprint looks like, where you might be exposed. It's way better to at least have an understanding and not ignore the thing that, is in the back of your mind that might keep the CFO up at 2:00 at night, or the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning. Those things happen, right? Everybody has that thing that they're thinking of they should do. And for some folks, it's, I know I'm not as secure, or I know I need to address that cybersecurity thing I've been thinking about. And so a basic understanding, don't ignore it. And do a regular review of your exposure and your plan, and making sure that you always kind of, it's an evolution. We have clients and partners that we've worked with, and they were great and not overly exposed a year ago, but then they deployed a bunch of new technology, updated some of their equipment, and it creates different exposures in a different landscape. So it's not going away. You could go from on-premise servers and devices and put everything in the cloud. That's great. All that does is change your risk. It doesn't remove the risk, it changes it. So you have to kind of take a regular look at what your exposure might be and make sure that your plan is up to date with that exposure.
Amazing. Well, Mark, I want to thank you for coming on. I'm going to go clean out my garage now and set up a two-factor authorization for all of my accounts, and probably go change all my passwords. So
as you should.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Mark, for hopping on here. And I know our listeners will get a lot out of this. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt, for having me.